All right, so we are reviewing for your test, which is tomorrow, which is chapters 3.5 through 3.7. And write this heading down in your math journal and copy along, follow along with these notes, copy them down as we go. Even if you feel like you already know how to do it, I want you to copy down all my examples, okay? So when we are solving two-step equations, we have step one. What is step one? Anybody, shout it out. Good. Add or subtract. And step two is what? Multiply or divide. Good. And these are the main ones that we use, but does anybody remember what we are actually doing when we solve equations? We're doing something in reverse. What are we doing in reverse?
If it's add, you subtract, you add.
Yes, that's correct. But I was looking for PEMDAS. So when we solve equations, what we're doing is the order of operations, but in reverse. Okay? And you can see that if I'm doing this in reverse, that means I'm starting at the bottom and going up. I would start with addition or subtraction. That's why our step one is addition or subtraction. So later on in math, when it gets more complicated, you're going to have some exponents and some parentheses that you're going to have to solve. And you'll do those after you do step 1 and 2, which is add or subtract, multiply or divide. Okay, so also in addition to these rules, we need to remember that equations have to stay balanced. So when we're solving an equation, we look at what's happening to the variable and we do what? Yes, but what do I always say? Look at what's happening to the variable and do the, yes, opposite. And then the other thing I always say is whatever, come on guys. Good, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Good. All right, so these are going to be our examples for this section, solving two-step equations. And we're just going to go through each one and how to solve them. And then I want you to pause and try to solve one or two ahead of me to make sure you're doing it correctly. And a new trick that I learned that I want to start sharing with you guys is you take and you draw a line going right through the equal sign. Bless you. And that line, some teachers call it the Great Divide. But when I say whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other, I'm talking about that line. Whatever you do to one side of the line or the equal sign, you have to do to the other side of the equal sign or that line. So drawing that line is just a really good visual to remind yourself to keep the two sides separate. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what's happening to the variable and do the opposite. But remember, step 1 is add or subtract. So what will I do first on this problem? Minus what? Minus 1. Good. Because that's what's next to the variable, a plus 1. So I'm going to do the opposite, which is minus 1. And whatever I do to one side of that equal sign or that big line that I drew, I have to do to the other side. So those cross out and I'm just left with 3x equals, what is 7 minus 1? 6. Now, again, I'm going to keep looking at the variable and do the opposite. So what operation is happening with the variable? What one is happening right now, though? Multiplication. So we're doing the opposite, which is division. Good. Divide by whatever is next to that variable. So the 3's cancel out, and I'm going to have to write over here because I ran out of room. And x equals, what is 6 divided by 3? 2. So my answer to number 1 becomes 2. And if I want to check my work, I could plug that 2 in here and see if I get the same thing on each side of the equation. So what is, if I were to plug it in here, what is 3 times 2? 6. And then 6 plus 1? 7. Does 7 equal 7? Yeah, so we did that one right. All right, pause now and try to solve number 2 on your own, and then we'll be right back to show you exactly how. All right, so here's how we solve number 2. First, step 1, add or subtract. So I see a minus 8 next to the variable. I'm going to do the opposite. Good. Bring down the 5k. And then 12 plus 8. Good. Now, what is the opposite of 5 times k? Divide. Divide by 5. So k is going to equal, excellent, k equals 4. And again, on the test, since tests are more important, if you want to plug that 4 back in for k and see if your two sides equal each other, that's a really wise thing to do. Okay? All right, so let's do 3 together because it's a little bit different. What's that? You did it? Okay. Let's see if you got it right. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, just like every time, look at what's happening to the variable and do the opposite. Step 1, add or subtract. Yes, so 13 is right now being added to p plus 3, so I'm going to do the opposite. Good, negative 17, that's correct. Okay, so right now I'm still going to look at what's happening to the variable again and do the opposite. So right now it's division, so Jeremiah said we're going to multiply by whatever's on the bottom. It's not a negative 3 though, is it? Positive 3, so my answer is going to be negative 51. Oh, I believe you. Okay. All right, last example for solving our two-step equations. Again, I'm going to draw that line, write down the equal sign. And this time, I have something special going on the side with the variables. So I'm going to look at the side with the variables, and what do I notice? There are 2 t's. So before I do anything, I have to put these 2 t's together because they're on the same side of the equal sign. So they got to get put together. So what is 4t minus 1t? How many? 3t. Okay? So all we did was combine those 2 things so far. And then I'm going to bring everything else down. So in math, in algebra especially, there's a lot of do something and bring the rest down. Do something and bring the rest down. And this is exactly how you have to show your work for your test. So bring down the minus 7. Bring down the 23 on that side. Now we can go back to step 1 or step 2. Look at what's happening to the variable, do the opposite. Step 1 is add or subtract. So we're going to add what? 7, because there's a minus 7, so I have to do the opposite. Whatever I do to one side of the equal sign, I have to do to the other. 3t equals 30. Good. So now, remember, When two things are written next to each other, it means multiply. 3 times t. So what is the opposite of that? Divide what? By the 3, whatever's next to the variable. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. And what is 30 divided by 3?
10.
Yes, good. 10. So the answer to number 4 is 10. All right, copy those down and I'll be right back. Okay, so here is our first formula for this section 3-7, the distance formula. And the distance formula looks like this: D equals RT. And what that means is distance equals rate times time. Remember, when two things are written next to each other, okay, sorry about that. So remember, when two things are written next to each other, it means multiply. So when you see RT next to each other, rate is being multiplied by the time. And rate talks about what? What's another word for rate?
Speed.
Speed, good. How fast somebody's going. Okay, so if you're not sure what rate means, think speed. So this is the first important formula that you need for the test tomorrow. So on your note card right now, you can write distance, just like I did, and you can write this formula, D equals RT. Go ahead. Okay, so we were just going over this triangle and how it can help us remember the 3 different formulas for finding distance, rate, or time. So we can have D equals, which means the R is being multiplied by the T, because they're right next to each other, so that means multiply. That's our original formula. Then we can have R equals, which means the D is over the T, and that's the formula that we just wrote right here. And the last one, what do you think it is? T equals. So if I have T equals, it's going to be the D over the R. The distance over the rate or the speed. All right, so those are the 3 formulas that we will use for finding distance, rate, or time. And we just need to know 2 of those values, and then we can plug it in and find the third missing value. Here's our example. Number 1 says, how far did I travel if I drove 70 miles per hour in 3 hours? So the first thing I want to look at is how far. What is that asking me to find? Distance. Yes, great. So I'm just going to write that here to help me remember. So which formula am I using?
Distance.
So D equals RT. Now, we said that if you see miles per hour, you immediately need to think speed, which is the same as rate. So miles per hour is going to be our rate. And what is my time? 3 hours is my time. So all I have to do is say distance equals 70 times 3. If I'm going 70 miles an hour for 3 hours, what does that equal? 210. Yep. And we're talking about miles. So how far did I travel in 3 hours? 210 miles, which is a little bit past Orlando.